Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Quality Time. And today we have a I repeat, very, and I don't think I put enough emphasis on it, very special guest here with us today, Dr. Sierra Dimberg, who is a sports psychologist for the clinical practice that she found, Camelback Performance and Consulting, located in Arizona. Sierra, what's happening? How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I cannot complain. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. I
Thank
met
you.
Sierra a couple years ago back in February with the Senior Bowl. We took a trip out there, got hired by Tatnuk Group with AJ Scola and Ryan. They were so grateful to have us there to help the athletes as they were transitioning from college to the NFL and going through this couple days at the Senior Bowl that was very hectic and chaotic. And I'm just so glad our paths crossed and we were able to experience that together. And we've met since then. We've been really good friends. She's moved from one side of the earth to the other. She's done so much great stuff. And I'm just happy to have her in my life because she's been a beacon of light and guidance and things of that nature. So we're going to get right into it and talk about a lot of stuff that's going to help younger people, that are going to help student athletes, that are going to help parents. And more so, you're just going to learn more about Sierra's story and just her great story that she's had and that she's built and continues to build upon. And so anytime I have somebody here, I work with males, with student athletes, professional athletes, and high performing individuals. Sierra does the same, working with a lot of professional athletes and leagues and teams around those leagues. And I like to talk about high performing individuals. They look different based upon who you're asking or the definition of them. So just beginning, Sierra, what would be your definition of a high performing individual?
Yeah, that's a great question, Drew. I think it can vary depending on the context and the just environment that you're in. I've worked with anyone from kids to military to collegiate athletes to professional athletes. And there's different levels with which you can perform. But to me, a high performing athlete is somebody that really goes above and beyond, or a high performer, I should say, and really is striving to get really exceptional results, exceeding expectations that maybe have, and that could be in numerous different things. It might be in athletics and whatever the sport is that they, are participating in, but it also could be in a few other areas. So maybe investments or in the military, different areas like that. Whatever you're trying to achieve, working towards exceeding what that is would be how I would describe a high performer.
Mm, way better than I could have put it. And I like to describe it, or I like to just talk about it because, when you tell a lot of people that, they kind of sometimes they exclude themselves and say, oh, well, we probably couldn't work together because I just do this or XYZ. And for
Yep.
me, I say, hey, even the person that's cooking fries at McDonald's during that rush hour, lunchtime where they are probably over the stove for 45 minutes to an hour and a half straight doing the same thing or getting these orders correct.
Yeah.
That's a high performing individual, and it's kind of that performance continuum where you have skill meeting difficulty, and when you
Yep.
follow on that mark. So I like your definition of it where you put it, you say, yo, I work with athletes, but yo, I work with kids, I've been working with military people, like I've worked all around that spectrum. And then just to get the all around scope of it, when we talk about performance, what does the definition of performance mean to you as well?
Oh, that one I feel like is a little bit tougher because it can encompass so much, but I think it's the performing is the process of working towards a goal, and trying to accomplish something, and whether that's a sport or a task. I love that you brought up, working at McDonald's. In high school and a little bit of college, I worked at an ice cream parlor that had a drive-through, and oh my gosh, during the summer, chaos ensued, right? Like you really did have to perform during that time. So that was a great example. And my task, right, during that period was to be able to deliver good customer service, the proper scoop, so to say, and whatever the product was that they wanted, and in a timely fashion, right? And so, in order to highly perform in that, being able to complete all of those tasks in a timely manner and ensuring you're just doing it all properly, that would be performance, I think. So whether you're just working towards that goal, and whatever that might look like.
I'm gonna change my example now. I'm gonna use the young lady that's working at the ice cream shop that has a drive-through, and you had a nice little drop there. You said scoop, and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna put that in mind.
Yeah, it was stressful, for a 16-year-old kid, who takes on that responsibility. Like, you were trying to perform, right? And make sure that everyone was happy with their scoop, and their product, and just also had a good experience. I think customer service, there's a lot of performance that goes into that too. So yeah, I love that example. And who doesn't love ice cream?
I know you have to be clinically insane not to love ice cream, but we won't get into that. That's me taking shots at where it doesn't need to be taken. And we speak about. I have a background in psychology. You definitely have a background in psychology with everything you've done, everything you've worked towards, the different demographics you work towards as well. Take me kind of back to the beginning on what got Sierra started and interested in psychology and sports psychology.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like my psychology journey started pretty young when I knew this was what I wanted to do. I do have a younger brother. He's almost 10 years younger than me. And he was diagnosed with autism when I was, I should say, like a preteen. And so I was able to see just all the resources that my family had access to through the military, which I know we'll also talk about. And I was so fortunate and so thankful that we had access to that, and the people that we worked with were incredible. And I was like, man, I really want to do that, right? Whatever that might look like. I really wanted to be able to support others and kind of work with people either on the spectrum or, numerous mental health disorders. And so pretty much since like fifth or sixth grade, I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. I definitely had some other thoughts like, I always wanted to study psychology, maybe law, maybe, right? But it was always psychology that I came back to and wanted to have as my foundation. And so, yeah, I just continued to pursue that. Love a lot of different social sciences, but truly feel fortunate that I love what I do. And then for sports psychology, I always joke like I fell into it. I didn't go into clinical or academia trying to work with athletes or striving to be a clinical sports psychologist. I had received a Navy scholarship during my graduate education where I served for 4 years and they pay for 4 years of my education. And we would have I don't know what you would call it, like a networking, not a group chat, but essentially, and someone who was a former Navy psychologist, Ryan Maid, who you also met at the Senior Bowl, kind of reached out and just said, "Hey, are there any graduate students in the Phoenix area?" Grad students have for better or worse, a hard time saying no to things, right? And always wanting to take opportunities. So I didn't know who he was, what he did, but was like, "I'm a grad student in Phoenix. Like, what do you got?" And it turned out he worked in Major League Baseball. And so I volunteered for spring training with them and just really loved it. I loved working with him. I loved the athletes. I loved the environment. Um, and so, yeah, I really enjoyed it. And then that team created a practicum for me for the next year of my graduate education, and then hired me as a consultant for the summer. But then I had to serve in the military, or I should say, got to serve in the military. And so I did that work for 4 years. And there's a lot of similarities between sports and military and working with high performing individuals. And so I was still able to tap into and use some of what I had learned and even grow some of those skills, but knew that I really, really enjoyed sports. And so when it was time for me to kind of decide either separating or continuing my military career, decided to separate and get back into the sports world. So it truly was just happenstance that I volunteered and that I, ended up thriving in that environment. I think I'm a pretty direct provider. I truly do curse like a sailor. So I think some of those aspects sometimes lend well to that environment. And certainly not for every athlete, but I think that it tends to blend really well for the athletics world. And so, yeah, that's just kind of how I fell into sports.
Man, shout out to the group chat. I always talk to my clients or just the younger guys that I mentor about just, taking chances or just the networking part of, like you said, falling into opportunities. Of course, you have to take advantage of it when it is presented to you, but the
Yeah.
amount of times that you can talk to people on how they got into a certain field and they be like, oh, well, I honestly, I didn't even want to do this, or I didn't have my eyes set on this, and XYZ happened, and now that I'm here. But you're
Mhm.
the second person that I've interviewed, and I think it's very interesting that has a close relationship with having autism in your family or having someone that's experiencing and going through that. Which I think,
Mhm.
when stuff like that happens, I think it's kismet. I think it's a work of God saying, "Yo, these are some things you need to talk about to highlight." I know it's one of
Mhm.
those things that people are still learning about, and it's a lot more prevalent these days that there are areas that kind of, cater to, people that are on the spectrum or that are diagnosed with these types of things. Like, and I'm not sure which arena it is, but some arena is friendly. What is it? Sensory friendly now, or there's some
Mhm.
more like
There's a
stuff like
few of
that?
them. Yeah, there's a few different, I think, arenas and sports teams that are doing a lot of work. I think the Eagles are doing a lot from what I've seen online, around supporting autism awareness and having a lot of sensory, but I also know, like, the Phoenix Suns and Mercury Arena does sensory work, so, yeah, I think it's definitely a lot more prevalent, and there's a lot more resources, which is awesome. And I also wanna highlight, you mentioned just taking opportunities. And when I was an undergrad, I one of the areas that I was able to, or how I was able to kind of hone in on the type of field for within psychology that I wanted, was also volunteering. Like trying different areas of psychology, because it's such a big umbrella that really helped me kind of hone in. So for example, I entered data at a prison in California, on a serial killer research study. Knew very quickly I am not the true crime kind of fan, and that was not for me, right? But I wouldn't have known that had I not had that experience and just volunteered my time, right? I was able to also work at a private practice in my hometown that ran a like foster youth summer camp, essentially. And that I found was, oh my, I absolutely loved it. And so it was like, okay, maybe more clinical, working with kids, right? So the more opportunities that you can take, one, the more connections, right? Like you and I meeting at the Senior Bowl, we both took that opportunity when it was presented to us. But also, you can learn about other people, the world, different types of jobs or things, and then also just about yourself, right? And what it is that you want to pursue and what you enjoy doing, and maybe things like true crime that are not for you as well. So I think that's also just really important.
And these are all things, see, I didn't know all this about you. And this is why I like sitting down and talking to people because I'm like, yo, you know even more of her story now. You said something very interesting. You talked about being able to work in baseball and then talking about that there's so much similarities working with athletes and military. Can you go ahead and
Mhm.
explain like, what you mean by
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there needs to be a book on it, to be honest, because there's so many similarities. But I think both just high performers, right? No matter what your job is in the military, you have to physically perform, and you have to do your job to and trying to exceed expectations. So I think both fields tend to have very high performing individuals. And then additionally, there's either deployments or in season, the travel schedule, the separation, geographic separation from families, the kind of structure and hierarchy of organizations and leadership as well. Um, just trying to think, being all over the world, right? So maybe meeting people in a command, and then them having to move, or meeting someone on a team and then they're traded, right? So you're kind of exposed to a lot of different areas. Depending on the sport, maybe you even play in a different country and are exposed to that, right? In the military, maybe you either deploy abroad, or you move out of country as well. So yeah, I think just the demands, the performance, can sometimes be really grueling schedules too, depending on what's going on. But yeah, just so many similarities there.
Thank you for dropping that on us. And it's funny, I one of my first people I interviewed was a acting friend, an acting classmate who's still a friend. I met him in acting school and he served in the
Hmm.
Navy. And we
Hmm.
talked a little bit about, sport. We talked about how sports and acting were the same. And he talked about how Navy and acting was the same a little bit. But we
Oh.
got into a conversation and I talked about how military and sports are pretty are the same or have some similarities. And I was
Hmm.
like, but you talk about the military and you're training for a life or death situation where your
Correct.
mistake can be, it's not just the loss of a game, or you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's the loss of a life, or somebody
Yeah.
around you, like it's life or death. And so I was like, I
Mhm.
don't mean to compare them like that, but I was just saying, like, you do so much training for when you run into the situation, you know how to handle it. And that was essentially what I was
Absolutely.
getting to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's funny, and I shouldn't say funny that you bring that up, but I think sometimes, and especially athletes, if they do have like a really tragic or serious kind of encounter, event, they kind of realize like, oh, okay, yes, winning is important. Yes, aiming for the championship, all of those things. But at the same time, if I miss a basket or, a pass or mess up a play, it is not life or death, even though sometimes it might feel that way just based on our emotions and our reaction and all the pressure, right? But that is definitely a difference between the military. So, for example, when I worked with, F-18 pilots being able to compartmentalize, that was for a very different reason, with a different purpose, but still the same foundation of trying to perform well, versus somebody needing to compartmentalize to stay locked in for a game, right? So the skills might be similar, equivalent, but the rationale and maybe I wouldn't say the pressure, but the oh gosh, what would the word be? I'm gonna have to think on a word, but the life or death, right, versus the pressure of an athlete, I think can be different.
Yeah, and you hit the nail right on the head. You just small little stunts that Sierra does. She's like, when I work with F-18 pilots, but no, that's what I love about her. She has such extensive work, and she really loves what she does, and she does it at a very, very high level. So let's not overlook that.
Thank
And
you.
as we talk more about your story, and we get into, Sierra, and everybody sees where you're at now, and I think that's what people do when they look at a lot of professions and they say, hey, I want to do that. But I think everyone, and the thing I like to highlight with people, are the adversity that they've gone through, whether just in their life before their career or just even while they've been pursuing their career. What kind of adversity have you faced, and kind of how does that help you with the work you do with the military, with your athletes, to better create that connection with them, as far as like, hey, I've experienced some of the same stuff you're going through as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In preparation for this conversation with you, I really tried to reflect on what were some of the adversity experiences that I've had that have shaped kind of where I am. So, in addition to serving in the military myself, my dad actually served for 26 years. And I feel fortunate for all the resources, and had another family member, in addition to my brother, who had some pretty significant and serious mental health concerns and issues. And so, as a kid, him being deployed pretty frequently, a lot of the responsibility fell onto me, where maybe other kids didn't necessarily have some of those pressures or things. And without getting into, detail and like opening up childhood trauma, Pandora's box, right? That was pretty difficult. And my dad and I actually did like a joint presentation at Arizona State when I was a graduate student about my experience as a dependent, and then on the reverse, like his experience as a parent. And in preparation for that, we actually counted the amount of like deployments that he had in my first 18 years of life to see like, wow, how often were you gone? And in 18 years, it was 8 years of just strict deployment. So for anybody that also knows military, there's also a lot of like workups and, trainings and things outside of that. So I can only imagine in addition to the 8 years, right? But that's a long time to be without a parent. And then to also have a lot of those responsibilities kind of placed on you at a pretty young age. So I'd say that was one, tougher experience that I had just kind of consistently growing up. And so I think even though and I played sports growing up. I wasn't a collegiate athlete by no means was I a professional athlete. Uh, that I still have some level of understanding, and having grown up in the military, I think that also worked really well when I was serving. And then in addition to that, very thankful for my naval experience. I learned a ton. I got to build on some incredible skills there, and it was during COVID, right? So I was away from friends and family. We had some pretty significant mental health work to do, I think, as the entire world did during that time. And so we had to, a lot of really strict, or I should say, a lot of restrictions to keep us safe, to keep our other sailors safe. But that also made it really tough when you're trying to take care of others' mental health and yours at the same time. But there's limitations to that in terms of, okay, you can really only go work and home, say for 2 years, not getting to see any of your friends or family. That took a toll and was pretty tough as well. But the one that I think that I use probably the most with athletes, speaking of not being a professional athlete, I am incredibly injury prone, accident prone, despite loving like playing sports and working out. Yeah, I tend to get a lot of injuries. And so one of them was I tore my labrum in my hip. And at the time, I was still finishing my dissertation. So just kind of like was like, okay, let me finish that. Let me finish graduate school. But then it was COVID and I needed support, during the recovery. And so it was like, just kept pushing it back and back. Right. So during that time, I was still very active. So had to make a lot of modifications, a lot of adapting. And then through the recovery and through the surgery, really continued to adapt, right? And modify whatever it was that I needed. And so I think, unfortunately, sometimes for athletes, injuries do happen, right? And so sometimes if you've never been injured or it's a totally different injury than you're used to or have had, and like your only outlet and coping skill is exercise, right? Or if your sole identity is athletics or your sport, and then suddenly that's kind of taken away from you, like that can be incredibly tough, right? And so being able to use my experience through recovering from different injuries, but also like not allowing them to just sit in, well, can't do anything, right? Like, oh, I'm injured. I can't do anything. Well, let's work on that, right? How can we adapt? A lot of the work that I do too, if someone's going to have surgery, is like preparing them. What are other coping skills? Like, let's have some stuff, right? Do you like to read? Nope, that's okay. Can you crochet? Whatever it is, that you can physically still do, finding those modifications so that it just kind of helps prevent maybe some of the distress that comes with that or any mental health symptoms. And then just processing like the grief of missing out on a season, depending on when the injury happens, if that impacts your career, right? All of those things. So I definitely use a lot of that particular experience, as well as the military and just, not knowing people, being in a new place. Like, I think it just gave me a little bit of a different perspective and understanding. In addition, just like not taking just bullshit, right? Like, no, okay, you can be sad about missing out on the season or your sport, and what can we work with, right? Not just letting them kind of like not do anything with
Mm. You said so much great stuff there, so much
it.
great stuff. And I want to take time to dig into it a little bit. Thank you for your service. Thank your dad for
Thank
his
you.
service. My sister was in the Air Force, retired after 20 something odd years. And so I know that experience of her leaving the house when she was 18 and then really not returning home until she was about in her mid 30s,
Yeah.
to come back to live in Colorado Springs, where she finished out her last couple of years. And, we never really talk about, that so much where you say, yo, for you guys to go back and look at 18 years of data and to really add up how long he was gone and to say that
Mhm.
equals up to 8 years, and it might have not felt like it at the time, or it might have
I
felt
think
like
it did.
longer,
Yeah.
like, but until you really count those days, you don't really know.
Mhm.
But you talked about a lot of good stuff. There was COVID, and a lot of people had to
Mhm.
figure out how to get through that mentally, whether they started
Yeah.
seeing a professional, clinical health professional, whether they started talking to somebody, whether they found different outlets, whether that was walking, whether that was meditation, whether that was yoga, just a whole bunch of things like that. It was a very pivotal time for everybody, and that's
Yeah.
one question I like to ask people, because you can't say, unless you're at this age, I guess you could say, 2 or 3 years old, you went through it, you
Yeah.
physically had to go through it. The world changed around you and for you. And
Mhm.
so some people came out better, some people came out not so good. But I think at the end, you look back on everything that happened with COVID, and people found different ways to do stuff. People are doing this more. They found
Yeah.
out we can work from home. Oh, I can.
Mhm.
Oh, I don't have to go into work every day. But you hit something on something really big too. You're like, everybody was just either at work or at home. Like those were the only
Mhm.
two outlets that people had. So how can you tell somebody, hey, try this or try that? The whole world shut down. Like we all trying
Yeah.
to figure out how to move through this life. And so moving a little bit, moving just going on to athletes, and I think you're a great resource because you work with a lot of athletes, young and old. What and I want to take time to talk about this situation because I haven't talked about it yet. There was a
Mhm.
young man named Kyron Lacey. I was able to see him play football for the last couple of years at LSU. Great wide receiver. Got into some legal trouble where there was a
Mhm.
car accident. He was, I think, speeding on the highway. There was a death that ended up being in that situation. And earlier this week, Lacey took his own life
Mhm.
in Houston, 24 years young, I should say.
Yeah.
And, it shocked a lot of people. But
Mhm.
suicide or athletes and people losing their life has steadily been on the rise. Just from everything we're going through with social media, just with a lot
Mhm.
of stuff. You can talk about it better than I can, so I don't want to get out a lot. But what are some issues that you're seeing now with athletes that you work with that are probably the most prevalent that you experience?
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for bringing up, that young man's experience because I think he's not alone. Unfortunately, did take his life, but I think that sometimes athletes do maybe have those thoughts of wanting to either hurt or kill themselves. And so, seeking out the appropriate professional support is definitely crucial. But the other thing that I think I see a lot is just anxiety, whether that's on, field, court, whatever you're playing on, or if it's just outside in your life too. And post COVID, kind of connecting that, we're seeing even heightened, diagnoses of COVID or not COVID, that as well, but of anxiety, right? And maybe not even rising to the level of like an anxiety disorder, but just more experiences of anxiety. And so I feel like that's probably the most prevalent just issue or kind of concern that comes up with athletes. The NFL draft is coming up very, very shortly, and I was finishing up doing a lot of draft work for a team, and it hit me that this current draft class, like they were most of them like seniors in high school. And so
Hmm.
hearing how different their experience was of recruitment and connecting, like totally different, right, than the class before that, and how that impacted them and how they managed to persist despite maybe not being able to go play with a team, right? Having time off from their sport, like, um, and then maybe being anxious about getting back into it, or even if you are injured, feeling anxious about getting back. Like, I think anxiety tends to be the most prevalent. That's not to say that athletes don't have depressive symptoms or, that that's something that I work with, but I think thinking through kind of the common thread would be more anxiety that I see.
And it's
Mhm.
you talk about COVID, and I was at UCLA when COVID hit. We're in spring ball. We're about to come outside for a practice. We go in the team meeting room, and coach tells everybody, "Hey, we got to shut down for a little bit, but stay
Mhm.
ready." It's
Yep.
hard as a coach because like you said, we've never seen anything like this in the world. This
Mhm.
is the first time it's happened. This is the first time, even it's kind of weird because sports. I would say sports bring people together. Sports,
Yeah.
whatever's going on in the world, you're able to come to a game,
Yep.
disconnect, see something, forget about whatever you're going through, and then go back out
Mhm.
into the world. But you
Yeah.
have COVID that hits, and you're like, hold on, there's not going to be a football season. There's not going to be a basketball, and of course,
Mhm.
with sports, there's money behind it, so they're gonna kind of
Yeah.
find a way. As bad as that is to say, they're gonna find a way
Sure.
to be able to kick some stuff off.
Mhm.
But for us, it was just crazy the process. We're
Yeah.
still, after we took a break for a while, we're still getting players in. We're like, okay, we have to social distance, so we have to work them out in groups of
Mhm.
10 and make sure they're this many yards away. We're doing everything outside, so bring the weight room
Yeah.
outside, and you really got to see firsthand. And of course, and I don't want to over gloss over, but
Mhm.
that senior class who's getting ready to graduate, or even that next class,
Mhm.
where it goes into their season, where they're like, well, coaches aren't going to be able to come see me play because we're not playing any games this
Mhm.
year and I'm going
Yep.
after these scholarships. So it's very
Yeah.
interesting that you say you're doing this pre-draft work and you're like, yo, this is a class that was seniors coming out during COVID. And what exactly does that do to it's interesting to see that, they've still gotten to this point, but also
Yeah.
you would want to dig a little deeper and be like, hold on, I would love to put a study together with this specific
Yeah.
class and be able to, put a little I don't even know what to call it, just a study or a not an experiment, just a study together to see, what exactly did these guys go through around this time.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so I know you talked about, so you talk about working with athletes, and you have the I work with mostly men, probably 90-95% of who I work with is men. You
Mhm.
have a great thing where you work, I'm not going to say your percentage, you could probably tell us, but you work with men and women. And so when it
Mhm.
comes to those demographics, what are some things you, I ain't gonna say like and don't like because that'll be stupid of me. What are some differences when you work with women opposed to men, if there are any differences at all?
Yeah. I mean, first off, I love being able to work with both. I find enjoyment truly out of both. I think a couple of differences that I've noticed are a lot of and I can only speak to the specific teams and individuals I've worked with, not that this is a general claim to men, and women, but that the women tend to be a lot more open, at least an individual with me, or sometimes in the group setting of just like what they're experiencing and their emotions, right? Which tends to align a little bit with just how women tend to be socialized, to talk about their emotions and things more. And then the men that I've worked with, it seems like we're some of the work that we're doing is a little bit more of the fundamentals and trying to work on like acceptance and just regulating and kind of identifying emotions a little bit differently. But I will say I have just had the best experience, and um, a lot of the men have even surprised me with some of their knowledge. And, some of the individuals that I've worked with, they mentioned, like, oh, yeah, I read The Body Keeps the Score, which for anyone that knows is like an incredible book for, especially within the psychology world on trauma. And I was just like, oh my God, that's awesome. And so I think that we're seeing younger generations, both genders and across the gender spectrum and continuum, that they're more open to that too, which I think is really, really great. And then there's similarities between both, right? People are people. Again, anxiety tends to be a common thread. I think one of the most common things that I've seen across both kind of teams too is that both men and women, sometimes if they're in a romantic relationship, they're like, do you have a resource for, couples counseling or something like that? So I think that also just highlights the nature of how sports can really impact a relationship, for better or worse sometimes, and just the difficulties, right, that come with that. So I felt so fortunate to be able to be exposed and work with both and have both inform the other as well in my work with them. So yeah, that's a little bit of the differences.
I'm glad people are athletes and people are more open to receiving help and seeking it now. I think
Mhm.
the push for mental health over the last I don't know, 10 or so years with athletes speaking out more, saying, knowing about Kevin Love talking about his panic attacks.
Yeah.
I think DeMar DeRozan has experienced some as well. Depression, anxiety, whole bunch of stuff like that. I love when I'm listening to an interview or hearing an athlete or player talk or person, and they're like, yeah, I was talking to my therapist the other day. I was talking to my counselor the other day. And I'm
Yep.
like, okay, great plug, because they're letting people
Mhm.
know it's just as much as like I was seeing my doctor, you know what I
Yep.
mean? And those types of things and those routine checkups, you
Mhm.
don't want to wait too long. You don't want to wait till everything's built up before you go talk to somebody. You
Yeah,
want to make sure you're
absolutely.
doing that in increments. You can talk about it better than I can. But, there's something to be said when you go and see, your therapist, your psychologist every other week, monthly, whatever it might be, so that
Mhm.
everything's not stacked up when it seems like the world's falling on you. And so I'm glad to hear that players are saying, "Yo, do you have a resource for my spouse?" Like, because a
Mhm.
lot of times we work with the athlete and we forget that there's somebody else that also might be an athlete, but they're also
Yeah.
experiencing this life with them, and it might be
Mhm.
different how they're experiencing it because they have to experience it kind of through them, wins, losses, hard
Yep.
practices, injuries, trades, moving,
Yeah.
like all that stuff. It's a family where
Mhm.
everybody's experiencing that. One person's, working or playing, but everybody
Mhm.
else is experiencing that. So I appreciate you just digging in and pulling back the cover a little bit and letting us see that. And
Mhm.
not the last thing, but what advice would you give high performing athletes, whether they're student athletes or professional athletes, that can help them just on and off the field? Just an overall, just, kind of what your spiel would be if you're just talking to somebody in passing, just one piece of advice you'd give them.
I think the one piece of advice I would give would be as far as like learning a skill, might be focusing on mindfulness. I think there's a lot of research, there's a lot of different ways to be able to do it. It can be flexible and creative, but that skill really could be pervasive in different like areas of life, whether it's performance or not. But the other thing, and you kind of alluded to this, that it doesn't have to be as stuff is like piled up, right? That you can seek this kind of work just to enhance your performance, right? It doesn't have to be like, well, I'm not depressed or I'm not anxious, so I don't need. No, you can still work to get better, right? And whatever your performance is. So I guess I said one, but that's two pieces of advice would be learn mindfulness, and then you can connect to this kind of work even if you're not struggling.
No, you're good. You can get 30 if you want to. I don't have a psychologist on here every day. And for the people that I want to highlight and give it to, I want people to be like, yo, I really walked away with something. I'm gonna look up, you mute. I'm gonna start searching for my psychologist or my therapist or my counselor. I'm gonna talk
Mhm.
about somebody. I have some trauma that I need to unpack, that I need to talk to somebody about. And I want to say the thing that I like about going to a therapist or talking to somebody else is the confidentiality of it. You can go here, you
Mm,
can talk to somebody, and as long as you're not a danger to yourself or other people or
yep.
talking about going and doing something, like, you're good. But
Hmm.
you don't, even though your friends are your friends, but also like this is a place where you can go and you can unpack everything and you don't have to worry
Yeah.
about how it comes out of your mouth, or you're going to sit there and do that one-on-one with this person who is built and has studied and has done all these things to be able to help you in the best way that they can. And
Yeah.
so, sorry, that's my short little spiel.
No,
But
I love it.
also, but also with talking to the athletes, so we gave some advice to the high performing athlete, student, and
Hmm.
professional. What advice would you give parents? Because now we see in youth
Hmm.
sports, parents are more involved. I see kids at a young age doing specialized training for being a wide receiver in college at the age of 8. Which at the age of 8, I
Hmm.
wasn't even playing wide receiver, and I went played in the NFL as a wide receiver. What
Hmm.
advice would you give parents when it comes to being around their kids when it comes to athletics?
It's a great question. So many of these have been great questions, but I think first and foremost, especially for younger kids, my sole advice would be let them be kids. That's a part of their development. Just being a kid, it doesn't have to be, a regimented schedule, specialized training, all of those things that you want them to learn the skills, but there's other skills that you're learning and can develop as an adult through athletics, through youth athletics, I should say. And so just let them be kids, let them drive where their interest is too. I think that can go a long way. The research actually shows that not specializing helps them more. So if you were to have them be a sole, and when I say specializing, I mean not being a sole sport individual, but being a multi-sport athlete, is actually more beneficial in the long run for them too. So if there's interest and you have the financial means, like absolutely continue to do that. That just because if you have them stop playing all sports and your sole focus is soccer at age 6, that you're gonna, make it to the NWSL or MLS. So um, I think just let them be kids and have fun with it, because if you put a lot of that pressure on, sometimes it does the opposite of what your intention is. So yeah, let them be kids, but also like you can get help yourself too. It's not easy being a parent by any means. I am not a parent. I have a cat, so pet parent, but that you can also help yourself with a lot of that, and making sure that you're modeling good behavior with whatever that looks like for you, healthy behaviors, If you're active, maybe that fosters their interest in being active a little bit more. So take care of yourself too. I think it doesn't just have to be on your role as a parent, but ensuring that you're taking care of yourself when it's needed.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I say that, but hey, this is a professional. Like I say, I bring people in here that know what they're talking about, that you can look her up, you can see her business, you can see who she works with, you know what she does. Well, you can kind of see who she works with, confidentiality. But and that's what I mean. It's so hard to tell somebody, and it's crazy because it's the most simple concept. Let the kids be kids. Like when
Hmm.
I up into and through high school, I played football, baseball, basketball. When I got to high school, I started just playing football and baseball because I
Hmm.
really started to gravitate towards football, found out I was really good, wanted to
Hmm.
spend more time in the weight room working and getting better at my craft. And then I played baseball on and off every other year, and I couldn't play my last year because I graduated early. And when I tell you that, and burnout's a big thing too. Like if you're doing
Hmm.
football year round for 5, 6, 7 years, basketball, AAU, all this stuff, I see a
Hmm.
lot of kids getting burned out by the time they get to high school when it
Yep.
really matters, when it's time for to earn the scholarships and to go on the road and play against some of the best peak competition you'll go against. And for me, my parents didn't really care about sports. My parents cared about sports because I cared about sports, which was
Sure.
funny. But I think sometimes you see a lot of parents who are like, "Hey, I didn't get this kind of support, or
Yeah.
I didn't get that far in my journey, and I want him to get as
Hmm.
far as he can," which is understandable. But like you said,
Hmm.
does he want to get as far as you want him to get?
Right.
Does he
Yep.
like this sport? Maybe he likes drawing. Maybe he likes
Yeah.
debate club. Maybe he likes going to school and getting straight A's and wants to go be a astrophysicist or an engineer or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So make sure you're checking with your kids on exactly what they want to do, and especially if they're not having a big sign too is if
Hmm.
they're not having fun with what they're doing anymore. Big,
Yeah.
big red flag.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only addition to that would say sometimes there might be other factors if they're not having fun, right? Like, do they have a good and supportive coach, or is it a toxic environment, right? So maybe they still love the sport, but there's certain other things that are aspects that you can change too. That would be the only addition that I would add.
No, like I said, this interview goes both ways. We're just trying to help the people and get them what they need. And so, speaking
Mhm.
of helping people, I love to talk about mentors, coaches, or any influences that you've had in your life. I know you spoke about Ryan, who kind of gave you your start and your foray into this psychology space of working in the sports world. But are there any other coaches, mentors, influences that you've had on this journey that you still keep in contact with today, or that just kind of really helped you figure out, hey, this is the way I want to go?
I honestly feel like I could talk about my mentors for hours on end. I feel so incredibly grateful for some of the mentors that I've had and that I continue to have, Ryan being one of them. I just feel so fortunate for those experiences. In undergrad, I had the most incredible advisor, Dr. Greg Kimju, out at Sacramento State, and he really believed in me even though I enjoyed school. I think he pushed me in ways that I didn't realize that I could be pushed, and challenged myself both in research and academics, and then even looking to graduate school. And so that for me was where I think it really started. But even in elementary, middle school, high school, I had such great teachers that really supported me when I needed. And I think the mentorship that I've received just throughout my entire life, like I truly would not be here without them. But in graduate school, Dr. Made, both within the sports world, but also within the military world, because he was a naval psychologist as well, being able to share our experiences and learn from him and grow and just get more connected, that was just instrumental to my development. And as I've kind of gotten more into this field, I think it's just grown. The connections that I've been able to make with other, mental health clinicians across different leagues, finding a lot more women mentors as well. I just feel so fortunate for a lot of those different areas. And so for me, one thing that I try to do too is like pay it forward. I reached out to probably just an astronomical number of people, both in high school, graduate education, right? Just trying to learn and understand what their experiences were. And it's one of the things that I love about you doing this podcast is people just being exposed to things a little bit more than maybe they would be otherwise. And so I think it's so important both to be a mentor, but also like to have mentees because they help me learn too. I continue my development and growth. I'm on a couple dissertation committees. Like those mentees, I still learn from. So even though I also have mentors, I think you can also learn from mentees too.
Shout out to all the mentors, the influences in you're in my life, but those that are out there in the
Yeah.
world doing the work. They don't expect anything back. Like you said, it's sometimes that they had somebody that was there for them. So why not reach back and help a couple other people or a handful of people? And then also, like you said, if you have mentees, they teach you stuff too. The lingo these people are using and all this.
Emojis, like what?
So they're helping you stay young a little bit, know what's going on, know what's hip, what's hop, what's popping. But really, like I like how you said I can go back to elementary school, middle school. I have always had great teachers. I've had great mentors. I've had great influences. And that's the same for me. Like I want to say just God put people there to help guide me, to push me, to believe in me, to show me the ability I had, what I was capable
Yes.
of. And I'm ever so grateful for those people, and that's why I do a lot of the work I do now with mentorship is just even if it's just putting some hands on some people and letting them know, hey, you're doing a good job. And I think that's what, for me,
Mhm.
that's what coaching was able to do, being around football, being in the building. You see
Yep.
people perform on the field, and that's great and that's good. But, what about that person that didn't do great today? What about that person whose grandma or grandpa passed away last week and this is their first major time losing somebody? What about that person who's in a relationship that, they just broke up with this person and it's their first real relationship? Like
Yeah.
those types of instances that we forget about, but
Mhm.
there's one steady person, there's one constant that people see and that's able to pour into them. And so speaking about
Mhm.
mentorship, because we're just rolling along and we just keep on, I don't, we keep segueing really well into all this stuff. What advice would you have for a young woman, a young lady who would like to
Mhm.
follow a similar path that you've taken?
I think it connects to what we've already talked about, which is take opportunities when they come, but also like seek out opportunities. Can you develop one if one doesn't exist, right? The worst that could happen if you reach out to somebody to ask for their time would be they say no, right? Or maybe it's worse for them to not respond. I don't know. But I think just reaching out to connect with people so that the more you can learn, and then just trying to either take or develop opportunities with where your interests align.
Man, you are so succinct. Don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid of rejection. I know I read, and this
Yes.
is funny, we're going to get off track, but this is good because it falls right in line. There was somebody that brought up some statistics, and they said, I want to say they said upward of 50% of males from age 18 to 24 have
Mhm.
never either asked a woman on a date or approached a woman to go on a date. And I was like, really? Like, not even like 50%? And it makes sense though, because we're a little bit afraid of rejection, one, but social
Mhm.
media makes it so that cool, I see her, I know who she is, I have her page. I don't have to ask her anything right now in this moment. I can just, probably ask her. But they were pretty much saying face to face, it doesn't happen, but don't
Mm.
be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid of rejection. The worst that
Mhm.
somebody could say is no. And if you're
Sure.
reaching out to the right people, they'll be like, "Hey, I don't have time right now," or "Hey, maybe we can
Mm.
meet a little bit later down the road." Like they're gonna find a way for you guys to connect,
Yeah.
but you have to take that initiative. It's hard
Mhm.
for them to be able to go out in search of you and find you. But they're more like you say, like now you got Sierra's information. So if you there's gonna be ways to contact Sierra that we'll talk about at the end of this show. But if
Mhm.
you're really into what she's doing, if you think you might be on that career path, reach out to her and she'll
Mhm.
most likely get back to you via Instagram or via email or something like that. But if you don't shoot that shot, it's not going to go in.
Mhm.
It won't rattle around the rim and circle around the hoop and fall in, but you'll just never know. And so I appreciate you even talking about that and bringing it up. And we can also, now it's time to get into the fun questions. We got into all the meat of everything, we got into all the heavy stuff. And now it's time for us to have some fun and really learn who Sierra is. And knowing that you're don't mess this up, Drew, that you are a certified yoga instructor. Uh,
Registered yoga teacher. Yeah, RYT. But mhm. You were very close.
Sierra is a registered yoga teacher. Over here just killing myself. Sierra's a registered yoga teacher, and like you said, that goes into the a little bit of the mindfulness part as well of it too. Um, when you're practicing yoga, what is I've been practicing yoga for about 13 years now, so I know the benefits of it. For you talked about that torn labrum that you had in your hip and all this other stuff getting back right. What is your favorite yoga pose?
I I think it depends, on what's going on with my body, what's going on just, in life at the time, but my favorite type of yoga is more of a restorative or a yin. It's a lot slower, it connects, it's a lot more, focused on the stretching, rather than building strength, which is more of some other certain types. Um, and so I really enjoy, like, a yogi squat. I think it does great for different numerous body parts, different areas. I also really love a child's pose. I think it can be just very, what would I say? Restorative for the body, but also the mind, and kind of continuing to practice some of those mindfulness skills when you're there and just learning to slow things down. But I think the yogi squat, I especially love that one with a lot of the travel that I do for my work, or whether it's personal travel. So yogi squat or child's pose.
Everybody always loves a good child's pose. It's because it's either where you know the practice is coming to an end or it might be beginning or you're just resting.
Mhm.
And that's also the
Mhm.
thing I like about yoga. It's when I first got into yoga, I got in there and I'm like, yeah, I'm 210 pounds, I'm muscular. This little 120-pound guy over here, I'm about to kill everybody in class. And 3 minutes in, I'm just shaking like a stripper. I'm like, oh my goodness, how long are we gotta hold this for? When is this class gonna be over? And the thing I learned about yoga, you're not competing against people. You're
Yes.
you're you're going against yourself. And if that
Mhm.
day you feel strong and you want to go a little bit longer, cool. On that day, if you
Mhm.
feel a little bit tired and sore and you don't think this is the best thing for your body, you need to pull back. Cool.
Yep.
Like it's not it's not a competition, it's not a race. There's no prize at the end for who practiced the best today. But once you leave that room and when you leave that mat, if you feel
Mhm.
like you've gotten a good day of working out and listening to your body and going a little bit deeper into yourself, you win. And that's what
Mhm.
I learned from yoga. What have you learned from yoga throughout your journey with it?
Oh man, I feel like my yoga journey is even longer than my psych journey. I definitely hated it when I first started, was like, absolutely not for me. I want more power. I want more, like, not going to spend my time doing that. Right. It was also similar to my journey with mindfulness. I absolutely hated meditation for, quite honestly, years. Even in graduate school, they'd be like, okay, we're going to do a practice. And they're like, oh God, again, like, just not for me. But for me, it's everything that you hit on. Learning that I didn't have to be perfect in the poses. I wasn't competing, right? I'd be like, "Ooh, what do we do for that one?" Looking at that person and being like, "Okay, well, there's no way I can do that." So, I'm just gonna chill out in child's pose. So I think learning to accept, but also tune into my body with what it needed, right? So maybe today I could push a little bit more. Ooh, that feels cool. Like, I enjoy that. I'm thankful that my body can do that. Or, okay, I'm recovering from an illness, or ooh, my wrist feels a little off today. Let me adjust, or, take it a little bit easier. So learning to kind of tune in, accept whatever was coming up during that time. Um, and just being present with whatever it is. So I think I've learned so much, but it has definitely been a long journey to get here.
Dang, to hear your yoga journey is longer than your psych journey is insane. But that talks about, and I think with both, it's a lifelong learner for both. Like there's never a time where you're gonna be
Mhm.
like, oh, I know everything, I know every adjustment, I know every
Yeah.
modification, like none of that stuff. Like it's a thing that's gonna continue for a long, long time. So I
Mhm.
appreciate you sharing it. It's always funny because I think we could talk for a long time just about a bunch of stuff. We're just two
Yeah.
interesting people. And I think one of the things we first connected with at the Senior Bowl, we started talking about books and reading. And from there, it was off to the races. You're like, I'm gonna send you this book. Have you read this one? Have you read that one? And we're just throwing stuff back and forth, which I think is awesome. So if you know
Mhm.
me, you know I'm a bookworm. You know I love to read, and this year my goal is to read 26 books. But
Mm.
this girl over here, when we met, I was like, "How many books have you read?" She's like, "Oh, it's February or March." And she's like, "I'm up to like 60." And I'm like, She said some big number. It might have not been 60, but
Mhm,
she said some big number. And she was like, I read a lot. So she's the
mhm,
person that motivated me to read even more. Um, what so how many books have you read this year? I know sometimes you go into lows because you got a lot of work to do, but how many have you been able to read this year?
Yeah, I still read a lot. And I think what is it, April, mid-April? So I use an app, Storygraph, to kind of track what books, genres, things like that. And the last time I checked was earlier this week, and I think I was at 81. But I am reading Kindle when I'm traveling. I always have an audiobook on, just whether I'm at a house in the shower or like driving somewhere, there's always an audiobook playing. Trying to be more intentional about laying down and taking some restful time. I have thoroughly loved the spring in Phoenix. I have a house and just sitting in my backyard listening to the birds with a cup of tea and like reading. So trying to encourage that a little bit more for myself as well. Yeah, so I'm at 81.
81 books, and we are in mid-April. Just to give you guys an idea, I'm at 10. In 10, I'm over here like, oh, I'm doing good. I'm 4 or 5 books ahead of my pace for whatever I'm doing. But once again, reading is just like yoga. It's not a race. It's not a competition. It's good to set goals for yourself. It's good to also, when life gets busy, to say, yo, I can't read right now like I want to, but I'll
Yep.
get back to it. But like Sierra says, so many different avenues, audiobooks, Kindle, paper book. I read on my phone a lot. You think I'm texting, I'm
Mhm.
sitting there reading, just sneaking. I call it stealing time, just stealing time to read. And that
Mhm.
makes it very important. And I'd be remiss if I got you out of here and didn't ask you, what are your, either we can do it 2 ways. What are your top 5 books that you read in your life? Or just what
Mhm.
are some recommendations of books that you recommend to people that will be good reads if they're going into this summer looking for some things to kind of keep them engaged?
I feel like books are so personal. I read a wide variety of genres, and I try really hard to do that. I loved when I did the book club with you, that you put on because it also exposed me to different types of books or different people that I hadn't heard of. So I feel like books are so personal, whether you're into like sci-fi or fantasy or romance or self-help, right? So if anyone ever needs book recommendations, please reach out. Love to talk about books all the time. But a book that I would recommend, just like everyone should read. As a psychologist, I am a huge fan of Brene Brown. I think she does incredible work that is pretty applicable and easy to digest for a lot of people. So would always any of her books. I'd have no idea how many she even has. I know I have them somewhere back here, but however many she has, that one's really good. Oh man, what other ones? One that I really, really enjoyed that I read this year, actually a client recommended to me. He had mentioned he had started reading it, and it was a very short book, and so I got it, and we ended up finishing the book together. Was I wrote it down so I wouldn't butcher the name, but the Seven Spiritual Laws of Yoga. And even though it's of yoga, all of the laws are really applicable to life. And it's by Deepak Chopra. I loved it. It was short. You can apply it. There's 7 principles or laws that you can think of how they, just apply to you and how you want to maybe apply them. And I think sometimes reading something like that can be a good reminder and an interesting one to maybe read at different points throughout your life and see how your views have maybe changed or morphed or if it hits a little bit differently. So those would be two that I would say.
And Deepak Chopra is so awesome. He
Hmm.
puts out a lot of stuff too, and I don't read nearly as much as I should, but just because you said that, I'm about to go get that book now, and I'm gonna read it probably this summer. My TBR is super long, so
Hmm.
I'm at that point where I'm
I
gonna have
have
to.
stacks on the my floor here. You see this just behind me, and there's multiple bookcases on the other side, but on my floor there are just stacks. And those are the books that I have on my TBR. My actual list of like wish to read is insane. So yeah, I feel you.
But that's the thing, there's so many great books out there, like, I don't think we'll ever get to all of them, but, we can
Mm-mm.
buy all of them. We can definitely have them all on our to-be-read list or our wish list and all that stuff,
Mhm.
um, and that's why I love being around readers, and just like you said,
Mhm.
there's always gonna be somebody that brings up a book that you're like, "Haven't heard of that, haven't read it, but now that you recommended it, there's no way I can
Yep.
just walk away and not read this. So, and like you
Yeah.
said, you like to be exposed to some stuff, and I
Mhm.
appreciate. I forgot I even had that book club. I forgot you were in that book club. And you're like, oh yeah,
It was awesome.
I appreciate you saying that. I keep trying to figure out. I keep trying to start something, and I noticed that I'm gonna just read. I'm gonna just put it out there and just read and just
Mhm.
go. There's gonna be people that come in, that drop out, that get busy, all this type of stuff.
Yep.
But I want it to be productive, and I want people to be able to come and know it's a space that cool. You read, come. Cool. You didn't read, come. And so I
Mhm.
appreciate you being part of that book club, and I appreciate you sharing these couple reads we have as well. And
Yeah.
anytime I close out, I kind of toss it to my guests for the last two questions. And I like to do that just because it's just anything that's on your mind that you want to talk about. But what are any last pieces of advice that you want to give any listeners or athletes today as we close out this show?
I think we hit on it, but I'll just reemphasize that, you can reach out for help or for professionalism, whether it's mental health, mental skills, regardless of where you are, right? So, regardless of what resources you feel like you have access to, you can find something to make it work for whatever your needs are. So, if you want to know mental health symptoms and you want to learn to optimize, your skills, your performance, you could do that. But also, if you are struggling, right, and need a little bit more professional help for mental health symptoms or disorders, like that's okay too. So I would just say that regardless, it can be helpful no matter what you're going through, where you are in life, no matter who you are, that it could be really helpful and beneficial.
Mm. And last but not least, Sierra, how can people contact you? Where can they find you? Anything like that for our viewers and listeners?
Yeah. So I have a website, camelbackperformance.com. That would be the best way. I got rid of my social media, trying to be more time for reading, to be more restorative, right? So I do have LinkedIn if you want to find me on there as well. So either my website or LinkedIn, it's going to be the only place that you're going to be able to find me.
That's excellent. And it's funny you talk about that. We'll talk about that offline too. I'm trying to pull back on the social media too, not just for reading, but just for mental health purposes
Yes.
and just I don't like what my screen time is doing and it's been doing right now. But like she
Hmm.
said, Camelback Performance and Consulting. She's located in Arizona, works with young athletes, student athletes, professional athletes, military. And I wanted to keep my water bottle because I wanted to show some love. I
Oh.
still got it right there. I still got my
Oh,
Camelback
that's so
sticker
sweet of you.
right below my Blockbuster sticker, the last Blockbuster that's in Bend, Oregon. You got Camelback Performance right here. Once again, it's been an awesome show. Once again, Sierra, I appreciate you for your time. That is Dr. Sierra Dimberg working out of Camelback Performance and Consulting in Arizona. If you need some help, if you want to work with somebody who's a great sports psychologist, holla at Sierra. She's the jack of all trades. She's one of the best at what she does, and she
Thank
has
you.
passion about what she does. And so, once again, that's the latest episode of Quality Time. That is my guest, Sierra Dimberg. We'll catch you guys next time.
Bye.
Sierra, thank you so much. That was so freaking awesome, yo.